A few videos ago, I updated my sub $100 projector video, and since it's been over a year, it is time to update the higher priced sub $200 category. However, this year I'm going to increase the range up to $350 to be able to include premium LED projectors as well as a budget bulb projector. And today on the hookup, we're going to run them all through extensive testing to see if you're better off buying the most expensive model from a budget brand or the least expensive model from a name brand, or maybe something in between. This video is going to get divided up into three sections. First, I'm going to go through everything that I can quantitatively measure, which covers brightness, contrast, fan noise, input lag, and power draw. Then, to test the overall viewing experience, I'll put the projectors up side by side in a single elimination showdown. And last, I'm going to break down all the results and look at some of the more advanced features of these projectors to see which, if any, is the right pick for you. Here are the 9 projectors that I'll be testing today, and right off the bat, I can tell you that one of these things is not like the others. These 8 projectors have a single LCD screen and a high output LED light source, while this one from Epson uses triple LCD imagers with a high intensity discharge bulb as the light source. In general, the advantage of 3 LCD over single LCD is the ability to make much more vibrant and uniform brightness colors, but as I said, this is the least expensive projector that Epson sells, so we'll have to see if that still holds true. The other big difference, as I mentioned, is the light source. LED light sources are good for upwards of 20,000 hours and will see very little brightness degradation as they get older, while an HID bulb like in the Epson is rated for an expected 6,000 hours at full brightness or 12,000 hours in eco mode. So for the Epson, I'd highly recommend using it on eco mode, which as you'll see still puts out significantly more brightness than a white LED light source. Starting with the brightness test, the standard measurement for projector brightness is the ANSI lumen, which is calculated by taking a brightness reading at 9 different points, averaging those measurements, and then multiplying by the screen size in square meters. In my testing, the brightest LED projector was the Nexego PJ40, which came in at 584 ANSI lumens, followed closely by the Jabra Ace K1 with 577. As expected, the brightness of the LED light source also corresponds to power draw, which was 174 watts for the Nexego and 184 for the Jabra. With increased power comes increased heat, which also needs to be dissipated by a fan, and measuring the fan noise from a distance of 18 inches above the projector shelf, they were all pretty loud, with these two brightest projectors coming in at 46.2 and 45.8 decibels. I should mention that the Nexego PJ40 has an interesting feature that lets you control the fan speed, and it will automatically adjust the brightness to avoid overheating. I found that at a fan level at 3, the noise was barely noticeable, and the PJ40 still managed to put out a respectable 450 ANSI lumens. I also retested the projector that I've been recommending in the under $200 category for the last year, the Nexego PJ20, which as expected still hasn't lost any brightness and clocks in around 475 ANSI lumens. And for good measure, I also included the winner of the updated sub $100 projector video, the Haprun L1, which clocked in at 245 ANSI lumens. So those are the LED projectors, and then there's the Epson Epic Vision Flex, with its high-intensity discharge bulb, which measured in at a massive 3,025 ANSI lumens in dynamic mode using full brightness, where it pulls 234 watts of power and has a fan noise of 45.1 decibels. But even more impressive than that is the 1,985 ANSI lumens that it puts out in eco mode, which doubles the lamp life, reduces the power draw to 188 watts, and quiets the fan down to 36.9 decibels, which is the lowest of any of the group. Brightness is definitely important, but so are black levels and contrast. So I also measured the brightness of a full black screen using the same ANSI lumen method, where the Epson performed extremely poorly with an average black level of 8.93 lumens on full brightness, which is 25 times brighter than the Nexego PJ40's average black measurement of 0.35. Using these two measurements, we can calculate the full on, full off contrast ratio by dividing the white brightness by the black brightness, which puts the C-Best on top with a contrast ratio of 2,427 to 1, the Jabra Ace K1 in second with 2,271, and unfortunately the Epson's ultra bright light source just can't be sufficiently blocked during a full black output, which left it with a not impressive 293 to 1 contrast ratio in eco mode and 289 to 1 in full brightness. The last quantitative measurement that I took was input lag, which is important if you plan to play video games on your projector. Input lag is the time between when your game console sends out a video frame and when that frame is displayed on the screen. For casual gaming, input lags under 50 milliseconds are generally acceptable, and then between 50 and 100 milliseconds starts to feel a little bit weird, and over 100 milliseconds is going to significantly limit the types of games that you can play. The two lowest measured input lags were 25.7 and 27.8 milliseconds, which were the hap run for my under $100 projector video, and the Nexigo PJ20, which is the sub $200 projector that I've been recommending for the last year. This makes a lot of sense because they are doing the least amount of processing for things like keystone correction, noise reduction, and contrast enhancement that ultimately adds delay to the video output. But it is disappointing to see the rest of these projectors performing relatively poorly in this test. Using all those collected measurements, we should theoretically be able to predict which projector will have the best viewing experience. But the only way to know for sure is to set them up side by side for a comparison. For this test, I set up each projector for a 55-inch diagonal screen projected onto my 120-inch Vivid Storm ambient light rejecting screen, and I used the Nature's Fury Dolby Atmos test video to evaluate color, contrast, sharpness, and overall viewing experience. Starting with the least expensive projectors, on the left is the Hapron L1 that I recommended in my under $100 projector video versus the almost twice as expensive Hapron L2 on the right. And this was awkward because even though the L2 has about 50 more ANSI lumens, it also has half the contrast, and the cheaper L1 outperformed the L2 in every scene. Moving on to the next round, the Hapron L1 went up against the Groview 818C, which on paper has significantly higher brightness and higher contrast. And in practice, those things showed through, and the Groview 818C easily overtook the Hapron L1 with better contrast, clarity, and vibrancy. Round 3 was another awkward one, putting the less expensive Groview 818C on the right and the more expensive Groview 881 on the left. And the 275:1 contrast ratio on the 881 made it look absolutely terrible when compared to the crisp, clear image of the less expensive 818C. Round 4 put the Groview 818C on the right up against the Xgoody X1, which again on paper was almost a foregone conclusion. And I wouldn't say the Xgoody looked bad, but it clearly wasn't as good as the Groview 818C, which seems to be punching way above its weight. So in round 5, the Groview 818C on the right went up against the sub $200 projector that I've been recommending for the last year, the Nexigo PJ20 on the left, which I still think is a great value, but watching them side by side, the Groview has unquestionably better contrast and color saturation, which is strange because it has less brightness and a lower contrast ratio based on my measurements. Either way, I think the Groview 818C clearly won this round and needs to move on. In round 6, the Groview 818C on the right is up against the HomePow C55. And even though the HomePow has a ton of really cool features like autofocus, 4-point keystone, and a motorized lens cover, the Groview's contrast is looking unbeatable as far as viewing experience and takes another easy win over the HomePow C55. Round 7 had the Groview 818C on the right and the upgraded Nexigo PJ40 on the left. Compared to the Nexigo PJ20, the PJ40 adds 100 more ANSI lumens, HDMI CEC, and 4-point keystoning. And to my eye, the Nexigo PJ40 is the projector that will finally unseat the Groview 818C by having slightly better contrast and noticeably higher peak brightness that made the Groview look slightly washed out by comparison. So the Nexigo PJ40 on the left moves on to round 8 against the Seabest Glorus G1 on the right, which had the highest measured contrast ratio of all the projectors. But even though the shadows and black levels looked great on the Seabest, it didn't have enough brightness to make the highlights pop, and I ultimately preferred the brighter image of the Nexigo PJ40. So in round 9, the Nexigo PJ40 on the left went up against the most expensive LED projector that I tested, the Yabber Ace K1, which has a very similar feature set to the Nexigo PJ40, and they both run Android 9, giving them similar options for keystoning, image processing, and correction. Although this round was pretty close, there were two things that stood out to me. First, in the all black scenes, you can see some light bleed in the corners of the Nexigo PJ40. And in scenes with a lot of dynamic range, the shadow details on the Yabber were significantly better. And some of the fine details in dark areas were lost in the Nexigo's image. So that means that the most expensive LED projector seems to be worth it, and overall has a pretty great image and feature set. But how does that compare to a similarly priced bulb projector? In this last round, we've got the Yabber Ace K1 on the right and the Epson Epic Vision Flex COW01 on the left. The first thing that you'll probably notice is the Epson has gray bars at the top and bottom of the image, and that's caused by two things. First, the black levels on the Epson are over 30 times brighter than the black levels on the Yabber. And second, the Epson uses WXGA resolution, which is 1280 by 800, compared to the Yabber, which is 1920 by 1080. Not only does that mean that the Yabber has twice as many pixels, but the Epson also has a 16 by 10 aspect ratio versus the more standard 16 by 9 widescreen that we see on the rest of the projectors, meaning the black bars on the top and bottom are going to be larger on the Epson. Comparing these projectors side by side in a light-controlled room, the Epson did laughably bad. But that's not quite fair since it's also more than 5 times brighter than the Yabber. So for comparison, I flipped on the lights and I reran the last round. And you can see that that did make the Epson look slightly better, but I still significantly preferred the contrasty image from the Yabber Ace K1. However, that test still wasn't quite fair because you're probably not going to buy a projector to make a 55-inch screen. You're going to go bigger. So I set up a 100-inch screen with the 4 best performing projectors from the viewing experience test, and here's what they look like side by side. You can see that the brightness of the Epson really does make a difference, and it ensures that every corner of the screen can show fine detail. But the lack of contrast makes for a much less dramatic image than the Nexco PJ40 and the Jabra Ace K1. The GrowView was unfortunately just washed out and lacked color saturation compared to the other projectors. And between the Nexco PJ40 and the Jabra Ace K1, the Nexco's image seems significantly more balanced, with the Jabra over-exaggerating dark areas and cranking up the saturation on the colors to the point where these red flowers look almost waxy and fake. Ranking these top 4 projectors against each other for pure image-based viewing experience, I'd put the Epson first, then the Nexco PJ40 in second, then the Jabra Ace K1 in third, and the GrowView 818C in fourth. But those aren't necessarily my final recommendations. So let's go ahead and combine all the data and figure out which projectors are the best for the money. Under $200, the 2 top performing projectors were the GrowView 818C and the Nexco PJ20. Side by side, the GrowView image wins every time, somehow managing to be brighter despite having 50 less measured ANSI lumens than the Nexco PJ20. However, on the Nexco, you've got 10 milliseconds less input lag, the addition of motorized zoom, and the fact that thousands of people have purchased the Nexco PJ20 since my last video, and I've gotten mostly very positive feedback about it. Still, with the Nexco PJ20 at about $199 versus the GrowView 818C at $139, I'd personally be willing to take the risk to save $60. Above $200, the top choices are the Nexco PJ40, the Jabra Ace K1, and the Epson Epic Vision COW01. And first, let me tell you why the Epson is a complete non-starter for me. Despite impressive brightness, good color reproduction, and a relatively quiet cooling fan, I could never recommend this projector because it ships with a non-user replaceable bulb. For $350, you get what probably amounts to about 3,000 watch hours on full brightness or 6,000 hours on eco mode before the bulb has significantly degraded. And unlike every bulb projector that I had seen up to this point, you don't have the option to just buy a new bulb, and instead, you get to put the whole projector in the trash. I can't imagine what Epson was thinking when they designed this projector. But even excusing the poor contrast, terrible black levels, and strange WXGA resolution, I would still give this projector a firm not recommended due to its insanely short lifespan before ending up in a landfill. Between the Jabra Ace K1 and the Nexco PJ40, they both have very similar image quality and an almost identical feature set, with iOS and Android screencast, 4-point keystoning, and good color management options. During the 55-inch screen Dolby Atmos test footage, I preferred the image for the Jabra, but during the 100-inch screen Planet Earth footage, the Nexco looked better to me. Going with the Jabra instead of the Nexco gets you fully automatic motorized focus and automatic 4-point keystoning, which doesn't work particularly well, while the Nexco has manual focus and manual 4-point keystoning. The Jabra has a slightly better contrast ratio and 9 milliseconds less input lag, while the Nexco has a slightly lower power draw and adjustable fan speed that lets you balance out noise and brightness to your needs. There is, however, one big feature that makes the Nexco the clear winner over the Jabra for me, and that's HDMI CEC control, which means when you plug in an Apple TV, Fire TV Stick, or Roku into the Nexco, you'll be able to control it with the Nexco's remote. The Seabest, HomePow, XGoody, and GrowView 881 all have streaming apps built in. But out of all those options, the Seabest is the only one that delivers a usable experience because it relies on an external dongle instead of trying to use built-in Android 9 apps that are outdated and mostly unusable. And in my opinion, paying a premium for a projector that has built-in apps is a huge mistake when a $20 Fire TV Stick will deliver a better experience that can easily be updated or replaced as better technology comes along. So that makes my new updated recommendations heading into 2023, the Haprun L1 for under $100, the GrowView JQ818C for under $200, the Nexco PJ40 under $300, and unfortunately the $300 to $400 price range is still a no man's land when it comes to projectors because it's too much to pay for an LED projector and not enough to get a good traditional bulb projector. I've got links down in the description to all the projectors in this video, as well as a link to a comparison table with all the data that I collected. If you appreciate the time, effort, and money that it takes me to make a video like this, I'd appreciate if you could use those links, since as an Amazon affiliate, I do earn a small commission on those sales at no cost to you. I'd also like to thank all of my awesome patrons over at Patreon for your continued support of my channel, and if you're interested in supporting my channel, please check out the links down in the description. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching The Hookup.